late Georgian and neoclassical style. Last class, we just came off the Georgian and Chippendale style. We wrapped up with Thomas Chippendale, who was a cabinet maker, and the Georgian style was really a kickoff to the rise of the popular furniture designer and cabinet maker. And Thomas Chippendale assembled a bunch of his designs in a book called The Director, and many of those designs were based off of Rococo style. So, as we transition into the late Georgian period, we're going to see a lot of influence from Robert and James Adam architects, as well as other cabinet makers or furniture designers, George Hepperwhite and Thomas Sheraton. We're also going to chat about the neoclassical styles, which are directly associated with Louis XVI, um, who took over obviously from Louis XV. And on Thursday's class, we'll move into the Directoire and Consulate style. Now, the English late Georgian and early neoclassical period was really a reaction to the excesses of certainly the Baroque period, and then even though the Rococo period had kind of eased up on heavy decoration, it still was considered an excess. So there was a need for simplicity. And the neoclassical movement was influenced by, of course, the Italian Renaissance. And the Italian Renaissance was, of course, influenced by discoveries of Greek and Roman ruins. The neoclassic movement also was influenced by the travel and study of Europeans, as well as publications similar to the Director that Thomas Chippendale was producing at the time. We start to see in the neoclassic period the beginnings of the Industrial Revolution and introduction to new materials as well. So the neoclassical style really started in France and began to develop before the Rococo period was over. During the time of Louis XV, people were beginning to protest the excesses, and they were growing tired of the asymmetry of Rococo style. That is, the downside of asymmetry is it does get tiresome. And they perceived it to be very unorganized. So events, fierce personalities, publications that were slamming the Rococo style, and theories all began to push design towards classicism. Now, Louis XV suffered from all of the spending from Louis XIV, but Louis XVI certainly suffered. He was in a lot of political trouble due to all of the spending of the two previous monarchies, and of course their participation in wars. Now, as a side note, it's Louis XVI that is actually married to Marie Antoinette. That's a major confusion. So, this is a huge time of political turmoil in France, and of course, Marie Antoinette loses her head because of it. The the French public revolted against heavy taxation because, of course, Louis XVI was broke, the country was broke, and of course, that began the French Revolution. To be at its peak during Hepplewhite and Sheraton's time frame. Pattern books are published, which we already know about. Excesses of the monarchy, as expressed by Baroque and Rococo styles, are restrained by political realities. And then the archaeological discoveries, starting in 1748 at Pompeii and Herculaneum, revive interest in classical architecture and decoration. And as these archaeological discoveries went on, it really gave a better idea as to what ancient interiors looked like. Most of what was discovered before were temples and buildings, so Renaissance interiors were based off of that. But this neoclassic period was able to dive a little bit deeper into accurate decoration based on those archaeological discoveries. The Adam brothers, Robert and James, were A couple of architects who led the late Georgian early neoclassical movement in England, they were actually two Scottish brothers that happened to make a name for themselves in London. Robert was truly the design lead, while James was actually more of the project manager and made the spaces come to life. Um, Although they were great architects and built lovely buildings, it was truly their contributions to um, interiors that were really influential in this period. And although design taken from Roman antiquity is not really new, uh, Robert Robert's style was very, very light and elegant, and certainly not as dark as Roman interiors would be. And also the scale is brought down a bit as well. Roman interiors were a monumental scale to impress upon everyone the power of the Republic, whereas they're just borrowing these design ideals during the late Georgian and early classic neoclassic period, and didn't really need to impose anything upon folks that were wanting to use these interior or replicate these interiors. So again, archaeological studies from Pompeii and Herculaneum were really important to Robert. He incorporated a lot of French decoration as well. Of course, the Baroque Rococo period was really, really influential and still kind of happening during this time frame. And then Robert also took a look at the Renaissance masters as well. Now, technological advances also help during this time period with some of the decoration, certainly in regards to better textiles, including carpets, as well as wallpaper coverings that could um, help enhance the interior and also speed up the construction period as well. So the image that you see here is actually a really popular Adam style. The ceilings are flat, of course. You know, the Romans loved their dome ceilings, but here the ceilings are flat and divided into geometric shapes. There's no cove or cornice at the wall, which was also a really popular Greek and Roman attribute. The walls would be flat planes of color. We do see a frieze at the top and dado treatments, as well as low relief applied with plaster decoration. So they kind of are simplifying everything and making construction significantly easier than it would have been during the Roman period. Floors often would be hardwood um, with custom designed carpets that reflect the ceiling geometry, so they have a sense of harmony and unity within the space. We see a ton of oval back chairs. That's something that's kind of carried over from the Baroque period, although on a significantly lighter scale, as well as consoles, which carried over from French decoration, French Baroque, and sideboards. The motifs that would be used during this period would be the honeysuckle, rosettes, a lot of swags, and a lot of urns that replicated Roman type pottery. Robert Adam had a painstaking attention to detail, so he was very meticulous and included original furniture pieces in signature colors. A lot of those that you can see are in the pastel nature, again, lightening up the interior space. So even though that we are on the brink of the Industrial Revolution, we're still talking about custom-made furniture, not items that are mass-produced as of yet. So some decoration items that were very, very popular during this period was Wedgwood china, and it looks very, very similar to pottery that was used during the Greek and Roman period, depicting certain images and using those swags that were also used during the Greek and Roman periods as well. Um, and Josiah Wedgwood china still exists actually. He developed jasperware, which is the pale background colors with the white molded relief of classical decorative motifs and cameos. But fun fact, he was actually the grandson of Charles Darwin, and he produced pottery for the British nobility, including Queen Charlotte, and he convinced her to let him name her line Queensware. Um, they were also known for purchasing the Waterford Glass Group, as it was named at the time, which produced Waterford crystal. And Waterford crystal is most popularly and most currently known, well, previously, the ball that used to drop in Times Square on New Year's Eve used to be made out of Waterford crystal. It's currently, I think, a bunch of LED lights, but it used to be a Waterford crystal piece. And the Waterford crystal folks still exist and are still in production as well. So those folks produced all of the crystal chandeliers for the Windsor Castle, as well as Westminster Abbey, on top of the ball that used to drop in New York City on New Year's Eve. Um, he was actually a contemporary of Adam, the Adam brothers, and his designs are derivative of the Adam style. So he would often create the furniture for the Adam interiors. We really see these pieces become much more delicate and lighter, with much more slender members that are used to create this beautiful furniture. And he, of course, published his own guide and pattern book called The Cabinet Maker and Upholsterer's Guide in 1788. So the chairbacks that you see here are very much associated with Hepplewhite, and he often would build a shield, an oval, or a heart shape uh, as those backs. Looking at the shield back chairs, Hepplewhite would use a variety of motifs for the splat. A lot of them would be ornament that resembled drapery. We can see an urn or a vase on the left-hand side, um, as well as rosettes were really popular, which you can kind of see on the right-hand side. And he loved to have a splat that originated from a semicircular piece at the base of the back, which you can see on the right side as well. Often the shield would not be attached to the seat rail, um, and legs would be straight and round or square in section with a spade foot. He liked to carve or flute the legs. Fluting you can see on the legs in the left hand image. And sometimes he would paint them. Sometimes he wouldn't leave it as just a naturally stained wood. He would paint them as well. Um, Trapezoid seats meant that the legs were much closer together in the back and sometimes had outward turning feet just to provide stability. Upholstery would always be on the seat and the seat rail as well. Another contemporary during this period was Thomas Sheraton, also a furniture designer and a cabinet maker, and his original designs are considered to be the finest of English furniture making. And he also published a pattern book because he was so fabulous, called Cabinet Maker and Upholsterer's Drawing Book in 4 parts. Um, Again, the chairs are lightly scaled. He liked to use a lot more straight lines in his chairs. The splats are often in the shape of an urn, also drapery or a lyre, which is a musical instrument. Legs would usually be tapered, again, round or square in section. Um, and armrests would sometimes originate from the cresting of the back, so very high up and then would curve down. Seats could be trapezoid or round, again, the use of upholstery, and mahogany happened to be his wood of choice. Um, Sometimes he would choose softer woods, but in those cases he would paint them to coordinate with the color of the rooms. Many times they would be painted black and then ornamented with flowers, or he would paint them white and then gild certain elements with gold as well. The differences between these chairs are significant and very, very easy to figure out. Sheraton used a lot of square backs. His pieces are very light and a little bit more contemporary, whereas Hepplewhite has a lot of curving backs or shield backs, as well as rectangular legs, and a little bit heavier in stature as well. In the neoclassical period, we once again see the revival of the three orders, which of course are Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian. Interiors use geometrical shapes like arches, which we can see in the mirror on the image in the left-hand side. A lot of rectangles and circles as well, used for wall paneling, but also in floor patterns. And we start to see again a nice formal symmetry as opposed to the Rococo period, which was very asymmetrical. Furniture also became more geometric and rectilinear, and a lot of plaster, marble, and stone were used. But to save costs, they would also use painted wood as well as metal. Most of the carved moldings that we'd see on the interior resemble classical profiles from Greek and Rome, and they would be carved in wood as opposed to stone. And painted designs were represented on wood or canvas as well. Now, you might remember me mentioning the Petit Trianon during the French Regency period. This was planned by Madame de Pompadour, who was a patroness of the arts, but also married to the regent at the time, which was Philip II, because, of course, Louis XV was far too young to rule. So she had planned this, but, of course, Marie Antoinette comes along, who's married to Louis XVI, and also dabbles in the decoration of this little space. It became her home away from home, because the Petit Trianon is on the grounds of Versailles, and she was not really that fond of Louis XVI, to be perfectly honest. She'd come from Austria, I believe, and they didn't really hit it off, so she spent a lot of time in this little space. So the living spaces were comfortable, but she also developed a little theater as well so that she could remain entertained. But when we're looking at the Petit Trianon, we see a lot of classical styling. So that Ionic order with the pilasters at the front. We see a little bit of that French Renaissance staircase, though, to make the grand entrances. We see the parterre gardens, as well as the cornices on the top and balustrade as well. So a very Renaissance-looking building, but built during the neoclassical period. This is a great image of the bedchamber for Marie Antoinette at the Petit Trianon. The scale is much more human, so they're really not replicating that Roman monumental scale during the neoclassic period. Fireplaces are considerably smaller, ceilings are lower, and the furniture is in the perfect scale for the space as well. So, a lot of times in these spaces we will see an entablature supported by caryatids or pilasters, and a lot of mirrors generally put over the top of fireplaces. Of course, mirrors. This particular little table, the Athenian, a mass production was item, very, very popular, was really born out of the industry was based that was on built around what Versailles, they discovered, and so a lot of use of that as well. And it also makes the space look. We've seen this before larger, during the Roman period. These pastel tripod tables that well, are to keep the held together by structures. So these were used for washstands or to display pottery or to hold your beverage while you're visiting. But what's really interesting is that quite often on these tables, the decoration for the legs would be Egyptian. So Egyptian caryatids or ram heads on these particular little tables, as well as an animal foot at the base, which is very Egyptian in nature. The image that you are looking at right now is actually a accurately scaled model that was developed by Mrs. James Ward Thorne of Chicago, and all of her little creations are housed at the Art Institute of Chicago. And she painstakingly put these together with incredible amounts of research into the scale of spaces of European interiors during the late 13th century. So she built these in 1932 and 1940 because she clearly had a lot of time on her hands. And many of the rooms that she built are exact replicas of existing houses in the United States and Europe. And they faithfully depict the architecture and interior design of the periods. So it's made at a scale of 1 to 12, which is 1 inch in the room equals 1 foot in real life. And some of the rooms even contain period-style rugs that Mrs. Thorne had hand-woven specifically for each case. So she did have some craftsmen help her, and she completed about nearly 100 rooms, which is significant. Her hope was that the perfectly proportioned rooms could substitute for costly and space-consuming full-scale period rooms in museums across the country. So Phoenix Art Museum actually owns 20 of these little miniature rooms, and the rest are at the Art Institute of Chicago. 68 of them to be exact. Actually, Knoxville has about 9 of them as well, and the Indianapolis Children's Museum I think has 1, and one other museum in Los Angeles as well. So it's quite an interesting little hobby that